Any legs to your economic plan that you're laying out? One are the trade deals. Second is tax cuts permanent, no tax tips, no tax Social Security,
right?
No tax overtime. Another leg would be energy.
Interest deduction on cars. Remember that.
That's
so
big.
No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security benefits for seniors, which is so great. Think of it. And no tax on overtime. But there's a fourth leg that I think is really important of that, where middle income people, but any people, if you buy a car made in America, I'm not interested if it's made anywhere else, I couldn't care less. But if it's made in America, and you borrow money to buy the car, which I guess 80% of the people do, you get a tax deduction on your interest payments. That's a big deal. That's never happened before.
A big deal for people that are buying cars, but
that's a huge game changer for the car industry too.
Huge, I think. One part that you can't control, although maybe you really can because you have such influence with the Republican Party, is the one big beautiful bill. You put out a big statement on that today. And how confident are you, having spent time with Majority Leader Thune, Speaker of the House Johnson?
First of all, Johnson and Thune have been unbelievable. They've done a great job. Their soul is into this, their whole heart and soul. And they're working so hard. And it's always tough when you have a very small, we have a majority, but it's in the Senate 3 votes, and in the Republican, in Congress, it's 7. Now, it was 1 for a period of time. We won some elections in the meantime, but it was actually 1. So now it's 7. And I would say this, even before this big drug and, if you take a look at the cuts that I announced today, if you take a look at the pharmaceutical and drug cuts, they're so massive that I think a lot of Democrats have to vote for the bill, number one. Number two, even if I didn't do this today, even if there was no such thing as these, 50 to 90% cuts, I mean, think of it, where we're buying, you're selling drugs in other countries for 5 times more than it costs in the United States. How horrible that is. Anyway, but that's going to be a thing of the past.
Some of them are they're cancer drugs too sometimes.
Yeah, everything. It's very unfair. Very unfair to people. They have cancer, they don't have much money, they have enough money to get through this, but then they end up going bankrupt. People were getting themselves fixed up or not getting fixed up. Either way, and still they were going bankrupt all over the place because they couldn't afford the drugs. But if they lived in a different country, they would have paid just a fraction. Think of how horrible that is. Anyway, so I fixed that. Nobody thought it was fixable, and I fixed it. But even without that, I think we would have gotten the bill passed. With it, I think a lot of Democrats have to vote. I saw that a couple of Democrats said, I'd like to be in charge of, I don't know if you saw that. You have a couple of people that go on your show that I assume are moderate Democrats without mentioning names. And both of them said, I don't know about you, but I think I'm going to be voting for this bill. I think a lot of Democrats are going to be forced to vote for the bill because, you add this new element that if this bill passes, you're going to get a 50 to 90% reduction in prescription drugs and pharmaceuticals. When you add that in, how does a Democrat not vote? I don't think they can win an election if they don't vote for it. But even if you don't include it, I think that the Republicans are very unified, and something would happen where they will get this vote.
You know what?
I think it's imperative they vote.
But look at the Democratic Party. Look at the leadership that's emerged. Jasmine Crockett, AOC, the Squad, Grandpa Bernie. They seem to be the most...
Well, look at Schumer. He turned out to be a Palestinian. I knew him right at the beginning. And I tell you what, Schumer's turned out, we call him the Palestinian senator. The senator from Palestine. No, Chuck Schumer is very disappointed.
Is he afraid to go against that radical base?
I think he's afraid, yeah. I watch him. He's lost his confidence totally. I just watched Chuck Schumer. I've known him so long, and he's in the other party, but, I've known the guy so long. He's totally lost his confidence.
It's interesting. We're talking about the radicalism of the left. And what's really fascinating is you take up a lot of space in their head. And it's funny, you said, how could they possibly vote against lower prescription drug costs? But in the U.S. Senate, the Democrats were championing the right of men to play women's sports. They've been the party of fighting for the rights of illegals, even Trende Aragua, Abrego Garcia, etc. They're the party that thinks it's a constitutional crisis, that you and Doge have had nearly $200 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse. They think that's a constitutional crisis. So you're asking, how could they be that extreme? Aren't they that extreme?
Well, not all of them. I think you have a lot of them that they don't know where they are right now. I think they don't know what to do, like men playing in women's sports. I saw a guy that I know, a good guy, Democrat. He's trying to justify, 2 days ago on television, he's being hammered, and he's trying to justify men playing in women's sports, and it's sad. I wanted to call him and say, you better get off that subject. That's not an 80-20, that's about a 97-3, okay? If they talk about, the famous, they always say it's 80-20. What's not, a lot of these things are not 80-20, like transgender for everybody. Let's have transgender for everybody, your kids, everybody. That's not an 80-20. They always say that's 80-20. That's 99-1, I would say. So, look, in one way, I don't like talking about it because I don't want to talk them out of it, because, it would be harder to beat them if they were normal on things. It shows that they're almost insane. And they do suffer from Trump derangement syndrome at a high level. And I guess I'm honored by that. But I'll say this, look, we had an election. You were so wonderful to me. You were really an amazing professional. You did it for the right reason. You didn't do it for the wrong reason, but you were so professional. And we won every swing state. We won the popular vote by a lot. We won everything. We won a thing called, that people don't like, districts. So in the country, you have districts, thousands of districts. We got 2,750 districts versus 525 districts. Think of that. That's why when you look at a map, it's actually a very important stat. When you look at a map, the map shows it's practically all red, the Republican Party. And this is a big party. We won, look how well we did with the auto workers. We won the Teamsters. The Teamsters were big for us. The unions were big. The non-unions were big. Right to work was massive. But the unions, we won unions all over the place. And we basically won workers. We also won people of common sense. Rich people, poor people, middle-income people. We won sort of everybody. If you take a look at the stats, we did great with Hispanic. The Hispanic people came to us like nobody's ever seen before.
Don't you think the Republican Party is now the party of working men and women?
I do.
When you put out the threat of tariffs, it was interesting. Between countries and companies, and I would scroll the list on my TV show, pledging $8 trillion, trillion with a T, in manufacturing.
Yeah, more.
Chips, cars, pharmaceuticals, they're going to manufacture back in this country. That was just the threat of tariffs. Now the deals are beginning to follow.
So we're here for really 2 months, because it's 3.5, but you got to give me a month to get ready, make the Oval Office a little more beautiful and things like that we're doing, right? But so we're really here, let's say actively, for 2 months. So in 2 months we have probably over $10 trillion committed, $10 trillion. Whereas most presidents wouldn't have $1 trillion over the course of the entire presidency. And if you look at this poor soul, this lost soul from the last presidency, and I say that because he was a very mean person. They went after our people, including me, but he was a very mean person. He was not a smart person. In fact, if you go back 30 years ago, he wasn't a smart person. You go back to prime time with him, he wasn't a smart person. But he was a very mean person. Joe Biden's a very mean person. People don't understand that. They've ruined lives. They've ruined families. They've ruined so many people. They could have ruined me. They tried to ruin me. But we're now in Air Force One, flying nicely to the Middle East, right? But they tried to ruin me. But some people weren't able to fight back. Their families have been destroyed. And the level, he knew what was going on, too.